Blood stained the ledger, but Kiara Sako did not flinch. She just pulled her oversized grey hoodie tighter, hoping to remain invisible. She thought her baggy clothes hid her body and her secrets, but the most ruthless man in Chicago's underworld was already watching her every move. The neon lights of the Chicago South Loop flickered through the rain-streaked window of the desolate accounting firm. It was past midnight, and Kiara Sako was the only one left in the office. She preferred it this way. The quiet of the night was a sanctuary from the harshness of the day. At 26, Kiara had learned the hard way that the world was rarely kind to women who took up space. She was soft, curvy, and carried a weight that she meticulously buried under layers of shapeless wool sweaters, oversized men's flannels, and baggy denim. The clothes were a fortress. If they could not see her body, they could not judge it. If they did not notice her, she was safe. But Kiara was far from helpless. Beneath the baggy exterior and the quiet demeanor was a mind that could dissect complex financial webs with surgical precision. She was a forensic accountant, the unseen workhorse for a mid-level firm that secretly handled the books for some of the city's most dangerous shadow corporations. She had grown up bouncing between unforgiving foster homes on the South Side, learning early that survival meant being useful but unnoticed. She knew the numbers, and the numbers never lied. The heavy oak doors of the office swung open with a violent crash, shattering the quiet. Cold wind and the sharp scent of ozone and rain swept in, followed by the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of 4 men in tailored dark suits. At the center of them stood Giovanni Greco. Everyone in Chicago knew the name, even if they only dared to whisper it. Giovanni was the head of the Greco Syndicate, the undisputed and terrifying ruler of the city's modern underworld. He was a man carved from marble and violence, possessing a reputation for cold, calculated brutality. He did not raise his voice. He simply destroyed whatever stood in his way. And right now his dark, predatory eyes were scanning the dimly lit room until they locked onto the hunched figure in the corner cubicle. Kiara froze, her fingers hovering over her mechanical keyboard. Her breath hitched in her throat. She kept her head down, letting the thick, heavy hood of her oversized sweater shadow her face. She prayed to whoever was listening that he was here for her boss, a sweaty, anxious man who regularly skimmed off the top of minor accounts to feed a pathetic underground gambling habit. Giovanni walked slowly across the room, his footsteps echoing like the ticking of a bomb. He bypassed the manager's locked office entirely and stopped right behind Kiara's chair. The sheer physical proximity of him made the air in the small cubicle feel agonizingly thin. He smelled of expensive cedar cologne, damp wool, and something inherently dangerous. "You are the one doing all the real work," Giovanni stated. It was not a question. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and settled deep in Kiara's chest. Kiara swallowed hard, keeping her eyes fixed strictly on the glowing monitor. "I just balanced the accounts, Mr. Greco." Giovanni reached over her shoulder. His large hand, marred by a faded white scar across the knuckles, tapped a specific line of code on her screen, mere inches from her face. He did not miss the way she flinched, nor did he miss the subtle, soft curve of her waist that was briefly exposed as she shifted away from him in her oversized chair. His intense gaze lingered on the hidden slope of her body for a fraction of a second before returning to the screen. $5 million evaporated from my port operations in the last 3 months, Giovanni said, his tone conversational but laced with a lethal edge. "Your boss is an idiot. He lacks the intelligence and the imagination to steal that kind of money and hide it this well. But you see the patterns." "I do not know anything about your missing money," Chiara lied smoothly, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had seen the massive discrepancies weeks ago. She knew exactly how the money was being laundered through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, heavily encrypted and layered through dummy corporations. But speaking up meant stepping out of the shadows and directly into the crosshairs of a Mafia war. "Look at me, Chiara," Giovanni commanded softly. Reluctantly, she turned her chair. She kept her arms crossed defensively over her chest, burying her hands deep in the sleeves of her oversized sweater, effectively masking the lush curves of her bust and waist. Giovanni looked down at her, taking his time. He did not look at her with the usual dismissal or pity she received from the world. His eyes were sharp, deeply analytical, and burning with an unexpected, possessive intensity. He catalogued the thick, unruly waves of dark hair escaping her messy bun, the full, natural pout of her lips, and the heavy, terrified breaths that made the thick fabric of her sweater rise and fall. He saw the beautiful, resilient woman hiding beneath the camouflage, and the realization struck him like a physical blow. "Pack your things," Giovanni ordered, taking a half step back to let her stand. "You work for me now. You will find my money, and you will find the rat who took it." "I cannot just leave," she protested, her voice wavering as panic began to set in. "I have a life. I am just a nobody." Giovanni signaled to one of his men, who immediately stepped forward and began ruthlessly ripping her hard drive from the computer tower. "You can, and you will," Giovanni replied smoothly. "Because if you stay here, whoever is stealing from me will eventually realize you are smart enough to catch them, and they will kill you to cover their tracks. I am your only protection now." Chiara knew he was right. Her brilliant mind had finally painted her into a corner she could not hide from. Her invisibility cloak was being ripped away by the most dangerous man in the city. Defeated but fiercely determined to survive, she grabbed her battered canvas messenger bag. Her oversized clothes did little to shield her from the possessive, unyielding stare of the Mafia boss as he ushered her out of the bleak office and into the unforgiving Chicago rain. The Greco estate was a sprawling, modern fortress in the Gold Coast district, hidden behind wrought-iron gates, high stone walls, and armed guards who moved like ghosts in the night. Chiara felt completely out of place, standing in the center of the grand library, her scuffed combat boots sinking into a Persian rug that probably cost more than she had earned in her entire life. For the past 3 days, she had been a highly valued prisoner in a beautifully gilded cage. Giovanni had given her unlimited, unprecedented access to his syndicate's private servers, a massive mahogany desk, and a quiet but terrifying demand for results. Curiously, he also brought her meals himself. It was a bizarre, deeply unsettling dynamic. The most feared man in the Midwest was ensuring she ate every bite of her dinner, watching her with a quiet, simmering intensity that made her skin flush and her heart race. He noted her nervous habits, the way she chewed her bottom lip when deciphering code, and the way she constantly tugged at her baggy clothes to ensure she remained covered. On the 4th night, the heavy library doors swung open, and a man strode in without bothering to knock. It was Gavin Marsh. Gavin was Giovanni's underboss, a smooth-talking, sharp-featured man with perfectly styled hair and a cruel, practiced smile. He handled the syndicate's legitimate casino fronts and the intricate shipping logistics. Chiara had only seen him a few times in passing, but every survival instinct she possessed screamed that he was dangerous. Not in the quiet, commanding, and fiercely controlled way Giovanni was, but in a chaotic, desperate, and treacherous way. "Well, well," Gavin sneered, stepping closer to Kiara's desk. He looked her up and down, his lip curling in obvious, unfiltered disdain. "I heard Greco brought a stray dog into the house to do his accounting. I expected someone a little more presentable. What are you wearing, sweetheart? A tent?" Kiara gripped her expensive fountain pen tightly, the metal digging into her skin. She was used to cruel insults about her weight and her choice of clothing. They usually stung, making her want to retreat further into her shell and disappear. But standing in this grand room, fueled by 3 days of high-stakes adrenaline, gallons of black coffee, and a sudden, inexplicable feeling of safety within Giovanni's walls, a fierce spark of defiance flared inside her chest. "I am wearing what I need to wear to get the job done," Kiara said evenly, refusing to break eye contact with the towering underboss. Gavin laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Listen to me, Piggy. You might have Giovanni fooled with whatever pathetic sob story you spun to get in here, but I know what you are. You are a fat, ugly nobody. Stop digging into the port ledgers. It is a complete waste of time. Focus on the low-level street runners. That is where the leak is." He leaned over her desk, invading her space, trying to physically intimidate her into submission. Kiara leaned back, her heart racing furiously. She had already found the leak. She had traced the missing $5 million to a complex string of shell companies registered in Delaware, and the digital signature on the final offshore transfers belonged to a subsidiary controlled entirely by Gavin Marsh. Before Gavin could utter another venomous word, the atmosphere in the Grand Library plummeted to sub-zero temperatures. The doors had opened again silently, and Giovanni stood in the threshold. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. But the sheer, suffocating, murderous intent radiating from his tall frame made Gavin instantly freeze and back away from the mahogany desk. "Step away from her, Gavin," Giovanni said. The absolute quietness of his voice was far more terrifying than a scream. "I was just checking on our new employee, boss," Gavin said smoothly, throwing up his hands in a gesture of fake surrender, though a thick bead of sweat formed on his temple. "Just making sure she knows her place in the hierarchy." "Her place is wherever I say it is," Giovanni replied, walking slowly and deliberately across the room until he was standing directly between Gavin and Kiara, shielding her completely with his broad back. "And if you ever speak to her like that again, if you ever look at her with anything less than absolute respect, I will carve out your tongue and feed it to the stray dogs you seem so fond of mentioning. Get out." Gavin paled significantly, his jaw tight with barely suppressed rage. He cast one last, highly venomous look at the obscured figure of Kiara before turning on his heel and walking out. The heavy library doors clicked shut behind him, sealing them in silence. The quiet that followed was heavy and thick with unsaid words. Kiara was trembling, her hands shaking so badly she had to drop her pen onto the desk. She wrapped her arms around her thick waist, trying desperately to pull her baggy grey sweater tighter around her body, wishing she could vanish into the fabric. Giovanni turned to face her. The cold, murderous mask he wore for the world vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, possessive heat as he looked down at her trembling form. He stepped close, gently but firmly invading her personal space. Unlike Gavin, his formidable presence made her feel entirely grounded and incredibly safe. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements so as not to frighten her. His large, scarred fingers gently grasped the heavy fabric of her oversized hood, pulling it back so her beautiful, flushed face was fully illuminated under the chandelier's light. "Why do you hide from me, Kiara?" he asked softly, his eyes tracing the soft line of her jaw. "I am not hiding," she whispered, looking down at her boots, unable to meet his intense gaze. I am not the kind of woman men like you notice. I am not thin. I am not glamorous. I know what the world sees when they look at me." Giovanni placed a gentle finger under her chin, applying just enough pressure to force her to lift her head and meet his dark eyes. "Men like me? Kiara, there are no men like me. And as for you," his hands moved to her shoulders, his thumbs gently smoothing over the thick wool of her sweater. He slid his large hands down her arms, a slow, deliberate movement that made her gasp out loud in the quiet room. Then his hands boldly moved to rest on her waist. Even through the bulky, shapeless fabric of her clothing, he easily found the deep, lush curve of her hips. He gripped her firmly, pulling her flush against his solid, muscular frame, letting her feel the undeniable physical effect she had on him. "You are magnificent," he murmured, his voice thick with raw, unfiltered honesty. "Your mind is a brilliant weapon, and your body is exactly as it should be. Soft where I am hard, beautiful where I am ruined. Do not ever let a pathetic coward like Gavin Marsh make you feel you need to shrink yourself to exist. You take up space in my world, Kiara. All of it." Kiara's breath caught painfully in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever touched her as if she were something precious, powerful, and deeply desired. The fortress of baggy clothes she had worn for years felt suddenly completely unnecessary, suffocating even against the heat of his touch. "I found the money, Giovanni," she breathed, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a newfound, fierce courage. She looked up directly into his dark, obsessive eyes. "It was Gavin. He is using the casino fronts to wash the port money before sending it offshore." Giovanni's jaw clenched tightly, a dangerous, thrilling light sparking in his eyes. He did not let her go. Instead, his grip on her curvy waist tightened further, pulling her impossibly closer, a physical promise of absolute protection and impending, brutal violence. "I know," he said quietly, his lips brushing against her temple. "I suspected him for months, but I needed you to definitively prove it. And now that you have, Mr. Marsh is going to learn exactly what happens when you steal from my empire. And more importantly, what happens when you threaten the woman who belongs to me." The atmosphere inside the Greco estate shifted over the next 48 hours, transforming from a quiet sanctuary into a high-stakes war room. The undeniable electric charge between Kiara and Giovanni lingered in the air, wrapping around them every time they were in the same room. For the first time in her life, Kiara did not want to hide. The heavy, shapeless layers she had used as armor for years felt suffocating. When she woke up on the 5th morning, she opened the massive mahogany wardrobe in her guest suite, ignoring the oversized flannels she had brought with her. Instead, she reached for a soft-fitted emerald green knit sweater and a pair of dark, tailored jeans that Giovanni had discreetly ordered for her. As she pulled the sweater over her head, she stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The fabric clung to the generous, heavy swell of her breasts, tapered at her waist, and flared over the full, lush curve of her hips. She looked soft, thick, and undeniably feminine. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a mix of deeply ingrained anxiety and a thrilling, newfound defiance. She was terrified of being seen. yet entirely desperate for one specific man to look at her. When Chiara walked into the library, Giovanni was standing by the massive windows, staring out at the grey Chicago skyline. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the world seemed to stop spinning. He went completely still. His dark eyes swept over her, taking in the full, unhidden reality of her body. The air in the room grew instantly heavy. He did not say a word, but the raw, predatory hunger in his gaze made her skin burn and her core clench. He looked at her as if she were a queen reclaiming her throne, and in that silent, burning gaze, the last remnants of her insecurity burned away to ash. They had a trap to set. Chiara took her seat at the desk, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. With Giovanni standing right behind her, his large, warm hand resting possessively on the back of her chair, she initiated the sequence they had planned all night. She did not just trace Gavin Marsh's stolen funds. She hijacked them. Using her forensic brilliance, she created a digital bottleneck, freezing the $5 million in a highly volatile Cayman account and triggering an automated alert directly to Gavin's personal servers. The alert was designed to look like a system error caused by Chiara's deep dive into the network. Gavin would panic. He would realize the money was locked and that the final decryption key was located solely on the physical hard drive in the Greco estate library. He would also know that Giovanni was scheduled to leave the estate that evening for a sit-down with a rival syndicate in the West Loop. It was the perfect, irresistible bait. By 9 o'clock that night, a torrential downpour battered the stone walls of the estate. Thunder rattled the antique glass of the library windows. Giovanni had left 30 minutes prior, his convoy of black SUVs loudly pulling out of the main gates. The house was supposedly running on a skeleton crew of guards. Chiara sat alone at the mahogany desk, the glow of the monitors illuminating her face. She was the bait. She knew the risks, and she knew the terrifying reality of what Gavin was capable of. But she also knew Giovanni. He had promised her safety, and she believed him with a blind, absolute faith she had never granted anyone. At exactly 9:15, the power to the entire estate was abruptly cut. The grand library plunged into pitch blackness, save for the blue, battery-powered glow of Chiara's laptop screen. The sudden silence in the massive house was deafening, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain against the glass. Chiara forced herself to breathe evenly. She did not move. She waited in the glowing blue circle, her hands folded neatly on the desk. The heavy oak doors of the library eased open with a soft, agonizing creak. Footsteps, wet and heavy, stepped onto the expensive Persian rug. Gavin Marsh emerged from the shadows, illuminated faintly by a flash of lightning outside. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant underboss from 2 nights ago. His designer suit was soaked, his hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes were wide with a frantic, cornered desperation. In his right hand, gripped tightly, was a suppressed, tactical pistol. He locked the library doors behind him with a sharp click. "Look at you," Gavin sneered, his voice a ragged, breathless whisper as he advanced toward the desk. "All dressed up for a funeral. Did you really think you could outsmart me? You stupid, fat little bitch. You think freezing my accounts makes you a hero? It just makes you a dead woman." Chiara did not flinch. She sat perfectly still, the fitted emerald sweater rising and falling with her measured breaths. She looked at the gun, then up at his panicked face. "The accounts are not just frozen, Gavin," she said, her voice remarkably steady, projecting clearly across the dark room. "They are rigged, If I do not input a specific command sequence by midnight, the money does not just revert to Giovanni. It gets completely wiped out, erased into the ether, and the digital trail leading directly to your personal shell companies in Delaware gets instantly emailed to every captain in the Greco syndicate. Gavin stopped dead in his tracks, the pistol wavering slightly. His face contorted in absolute rage. You are lying. You are a street rat from the South Side. You do not have the authorization to set a dead man switch on the syndicate network. I am the forensic accountant who found your pathetic, sloppy trail in 3 days, Chiara countered, a cold, hard edge creeping into her tone. I bypassed your firewalls while you were busy insulting my clothes. You are completely exposed. Killing me will not save you. It will just seal your death warrant. Gavin let out a desperate, unhinged laugh, raising the gun and pointing it directly at her chest. I will take my chances. I will blow your brains out, take the hard drive, and vanish before Greco even realizes his favorite little pig is bleeding out on his expensive rug. He took a step forward, his finger tightening on the trigger. Chiara held his gaze, her heart pounding a violent rhythm, trusting the darkness of the room and the promise of the man who ruled it. A second, before Gavin could pull the trigger, the shadows in the corner of the library violently detached themselves from the wall. Giovanni had never left. The convoy that pulled out of the gates had been empty save for his drivers. He had been standing perfectly still in the darkest corner of the room the entire time, watching the man he once trusted threaten the woman he had claimed as his own. The movement was too fast for Gavin to track. Giovanni crossed the distance like a massive, predatory beast. His large, scarred hand clamped down over the slide of Gavin's pistol, crushing the weapon and the bones in Gavin's hand simultaneously. Gavin let out a piercing, guttural shriek of agony as the gun clattered uselessly to the floor. Before Gavin could even attempt to retreat, Giovanni drove his knee brutally into the underboss's ribs. The sickening crack of bone echoed over the thunder outside. Gavin collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, clutching his ruined hand. The battery-powered glow of the laptop cast harsh, monstrous shadows across Giovanni's face. He looked like the devil himself, cold, detached, and radiating an overwhelming, suffocating violence. You talked a lot of garbage about my syndicate, Gavin, Giovanni said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that shook the floorboards. But I could forgive ambition. I could even, on a good day, forgive greed. Giovanni grabbed Gavin by the lapels of his soaked suit, hauling him off the floor with terrifying ease. He slammed the underboss face first into the heavy mahogany desk, right beside Chiara's keyboard. Chiara did not look away. She watched the brutal execution of Mafia justice without an ounce of pity. But you came into my house, Giovanni continued, drawing a heavy, serrated hunting knife from the sheath at his belt. You insulted the woman I value above all else. You pointed a weapon at her. You made her feel small. That is the one sin I will never, ever forgive. Please, boss, I was just... Gavin choked out, blood spilling from his lips as he struggled helplessly against Giovanni's iron grip. Giovanni did not let him finish. With a cold, clinical precision, he drove the hilt of the knife into the back of Gavin's skull, knocking him completely unconscious. The underboss went entirely limp, sliding off the desk and crumpling onto the Persian rug like a discarded rag doll. Take out the trash, Giovanni commanded, not even looking toward the door. From the shadows of the hallway, 2 of Giovanni's most trusted enforcers quietly entered the room. They did not speak. They simply grabbed Gavin by his ankles and dragged his unconscious, bleeding form out of the library, the heavy oak doors closing silently behind them. Gavin Marsh would never be seen in Chicago again. The library was suddenly dead quiet, the adrenaline of the violent encounter slowly leaching out of the air. Giovanni stood over the desk, breathing heavily. He wiped a single drop of Gavin's blood from his knuckles with a pristine white handkerchief. He kept his back to Chiara for a long moment, allowing her time to process the sheer, unadulterated brutality she had just witnessed. He knew who he was. He was a monster, a king of a dark and bloody underworld, and he fully expected her to run. He expected her to shrink away from him, to hide behind her clothes and her silence once more. Slowly, Giovanni turned around to face her. Chiara was still sitting in the chair. She was trembling slightly, but her chin was held high. She looked at the blood on his hands, then up at his dark, obsidian eyes. She did not see a monster. She saw the absolute, terrifying safety he provided. She saw a man who looked at her lush curves and sharp mind, and saw a queen, not a liability. "Are you afraid of me, Chiara?" he asked softly, the dangerous edge in his voice entirely replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. Chiara stood up. The emerald sweater hugged her waist and accentuated the heavy, beautiful flare of her hips. She stepped out from behind the desk, closing the distance between them. She did not wrap her arms around herself. She did not try to hide. "I was afraid of the world, Giovanni," she whispered, reaching out to gently touch his broad chest, right over his racing heart. "I was afraid of being seen, of being judged for taking up space. But I am not afraid of you. You are the only person who actually sees me." A heavy, shuddering breath escaped Giovanni's lips. He dropped the handkerchief. His large, scarred hands reached for her, gripping her thick, soft waist with a desperate, crushing intensity. He pulled her flush against his hard, muscular frame, lifting her slightly off the ground, so she had to look up into his eyes. The contrast between them was striking, his ruthless, hardened edges melting completely against her soft, yielding curves. "You are never hiding again," he vowed, his lips hovering mere inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin. "You are going to stand right beside me. You are going to take up all the space you want in my city, in my home, and in my bed. You belong to me now, Chiara, and I protect what is mine." Chiara threaded her fingers into his dark hair, pulling him down. "I am not going anywhere," she murmured against his mouth. When he kissed her, it was not gentle. It was a searing, possessive brand, a clash of dark romance and unyielding devotion. It tasted of adrenaline, rain, and absolute power. Chiara kissed him back with equal ferocity, pouring all her hidden strength and locked away passion into the embrace. She was the brilliant, curvy accountant from the South Side, and he was the ruthless Mafia boss of Chicago. But in the dark, heavy silence of the Grand Library, they were simply two powerful forces colliding, ready to conquer the underworld together. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, but wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, Chiara Sacco, had finally been found. If you felt the intense heat and high-stakes tension of Chiara and Giovanni's dark underworld romance, do not forget to tap that like button right now. Leave a comment down below and tell us which Mafia romance trope is your absolute favorite. And be sure to share this gripping story with your fellow dark romance lovers. Most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another thrilling,